This video will explore the life and strange death of Katherine Cecil Thurston. Born Kathleen Annie Josephine Madden in 1874 at 14 Bridge Street, Cork, Ireland, Kathleen Cecil Thurston, or KCT as she is known in research literature, was the only daughter of banker Paul Madden, who was mayor of Cork in 1885 and 1886, and Eliza Madden. She was educated privately at her family home, Woodsgift, in Blackrock Road. In her life, she made no claim to have been the interesting or precocious child from whom relatives expect things. A strong appreciation of outdoor life, a love of dogs and horses, of all animals, and a great devotion to the sea made up most of the amusements and ambitions for her childhood. She wrote to her lover later in life that she worked continuously, save for a motor drive that she took late last night in company with her aunt. She loved the speed and mystery of night drives, and to experience the full sense of adventure. She bragged that she sat on the step of the car at the chauffeur's feet, and that she was very mad, she supposed. In the Bookman interview, she said she was born in Cork, and her words had that suggestion of the delightful Irish brogue which adds to the charm of the speech of a cultured Irish woman. I am an only child, and I was educated entirely at home and quite spoiled, so I have been told. As a child, one of my hobbies was the writing of little plays and children's stories, but I very soon grew out of the habit and became occupied with other interests. I doubt whether Irish society helps very much to cultivate any serious life work for a girl. We have a genius for enjoying ourselves, and if circumstances do not compel us, we do not think much of engaging in any regular and exacting task. So that with the pleasures of life which came to me after I came out, the memory of my childhood's writing days became fainter than ever, she said. One of Thurston's earliest recollections was of accompanying her father to Hawarden and hearing Mr. Gladstone speak in favor of Irish Home Rule. Thurston first came to the notice of Edinburgh publisher William Blackwood and Sons when she submitted several of her novels and short stories to them after her marriage in 1902. Her first novel, The Circle, was published by Blackwood in 1903. A year later, in 1904, her most successful novel, John Chilcote, M.P., was published in the United Kingdom, again by Blackwood, and simultaneously in the United States as The Masquerader by the New York publishing house Harper & Brothers. Her novels achieved success in Britain and the United States. John Chilcote, M.P. was a political thriller, and on the New York Times bestseller list for 2 years, ranking as third best-selling book for 1904 and seventh best in 1905. It sold over 200,000 copies. Scripted by her husband, it was produced by Sir George Alexander at St. John's Theatre, London, in 1905. She next published The Gambler in 1906, a romantic melodrama that whirls around a society of social privilege between rural Ireland, Venice, Monte Carlo, and London. The Gambler also made the U.S. best-selling lists for that year. This was the first time the New York Times had recorded any author, female or male, as having 2 top 10 books in a single year. In 1910, she was back on the same list at number 4 with her novel Max, the story of a young Russian princess who flees disguised as a boy to Paris on the night before her arranged marriage. The Mystics, published in 1907, coincided with the failure of her marriage, as Ernest Temple Thurston left her in December of that year. Her 1908 novel, The Fly on the Wheel, about illicit love, was described in 2022 as a lost classic of Irish fiction. It is an unusual tale of obsessive love that charts the fall of the Waterford solicitor Stephen Carey. It is perhaps the first Irish novel to feature a motor car in a love scene. The story ends with the female protagonist, Isabel Costello's suicide in front of her lover Stephen and a priest. She takes toxic pills and a glass of wine, a reverse communion that is suggestive of the author's radicalism. John Chilcote, MP, was adapted for the American stage by John Hunter Booth of the Booth acting family and opened on Broadway in 1917. It was filmed 4 times, the first as a silent film by American Pathé in 1912 under the title The Compact, the second a 1920 Russian-French co-production, and 2 more films were made using the American book The Masquerader in 1922 and then by the Samuel Goldwyn Company in 1933. Thurston was advertised through her family connections and to the Irish nationalist movement to American audiences who were very friendly to that movement. Mrs. Thurston, whose John Chilcote MP has taken the reading world by storm, is a daughter of the late Alderman Paul Madden of Cork, one advertisement read, an ardent home ruler, and in Land League days sacrificed much time and money and seriously imperiled his liberty. He was a devout Catholic, highly respected in commercial circles, and very charitable. Thurston was able to weave her father's ability into her own novels. She had the ability to create novels which matched the public mood. She was able to capture and recreate the sense of radicalism and optimism alongside the hope and fear of change, which epitomized the Edwardian era. Her popular storytelling ability brought her to the attention of both the public and the press. Thurston was also a strikingly attractive woman, in possession of an entertaining personality and glamorous lifestyle. This lended to her status as celebrity. These factors, coupled with her often controversial marriage to the English author Ernest Temple Thurston, ensured that she was much in demand as both author and gossip subject on the pages of many Edwardian newspapers and magazines. Her novels would regularly sell out within days of publication, with her American publishers often taken unawares by the public clamor for her work. Following the publication of The Masquerader, Harper's Book News reported, "The book has been out just 7 days, and in that short time the bookstores have sold out. A new big edition has gone to press. It is already being made into a play in England and into a different play in America. Requests have been received for translation into French and Italian. The publishers rather expected wide interest in the book, but not quite so sudden an attack upon supply. Thus far, and this is very unusual, every single review has been not only good, but almost feverishly enthusiastic." Thurston's popularity extended beyond that of the English-speaking world, with her novels translated for publication throughout Europe. The income generated from her success as a novelist enabled Thurston to lead a glamorous and some would say decadent life. Following her marriage in 1901, Thurston set up home in London, and although she purchased other houses, this would continue to be her base for the remaining years of her life. Her London home was the frequent venue for parties, where she presided over an interesting and eclectic blend of guests. Guests drawn from the literary establishment, politicians, ambassadors, and friends and acquaintances from the upper echelons of London society were entertained in lavish style at her home at 20 Victoria Road in Kensington. Thurston also loved to travel, and she and her husband often embarked on trips to Europe, Venice and Monte Carlo being among their favorite destinations. Despite a love of exotic travel, her favorite port of call was Cork in her native Ireland. Her rich social life and her love of travel provided her with valuable material for her literary work, with European destinations and Ireland featuring as the backdrop for the majority of her novels and short stories. The importance of Ireland cannot be understated here, as she brought a growing audience to the attention of Irish stories and the Irish environment. Ireland was undergoing a lot of turmoil as it fought for home rule, and there was also talk of property being seized and being given back to Irish citizens. This created a lot of discourse in England, where many had purchased Irish property, And so Thurston, being this voice for Ireland, undoubtedly made enemies despite hosting these upper echelon parties. Thurston remained charitable. In 1907, her secretary wrote, "She is anxious to render every assistance to the Lord Mayor's Cripples Fund. She would like to know the latest date for sending in manuscripts, as having recently been unwell, she is unable to write the required story immediately, but could have it ready a few weeks hence." Her beloved father died in 1901, and her mother died in 1904. It would appear that the mother that died in 1904 was in fact her stepmother, Catherine Barry, whom Thurston's father had married following the death of her own mother, Elizabeth Dwyer. The loss of her mother at an early age may have been a further contributing factor to her closeness to her father, and his willingness to include his daughter in his political and charitable work. In February 1901, 5 weeks after her father's death, she married the British writer Ernest Temple Thurston, who was 5 years her junior. The Thurstons set up home at 2 Priory Terrace, Kew, and lived there until 1904, when they moved into the larger house at 20 Victoria Road, Kensington. Ernest Temple Thurston was fervently anti-Catholic, and for a woman who had been immersed in the cause of Irish Home Rule and a devout Catholic throughout her life, her choice of husband appears strange. The Thurston Archive contains no mention of the marriage ceremony. However, owing to the acrimonious nature of the couple's divorce, these may have been destroyed by Thurston or Ernest Temple Thurston. Ernest was born into a minor literary family in 1879. He began his writing career when he was only 16 years old, with the publication of a book of poems, and he continued to write throughout his life. He was discovered by Evelyn Waugh's publisher father, Arthur, the managing director of the publishing firm of Chapman and Hall. For 25 years, Ernest was a prominent and successful author. His first novel, The Apple of Eden, recounted a priest's fall from grace. "Religion and sex is an infallible mixture," Arthur Waugh was quoted as saying. Thurston wrote 2 kinds of novel, the one powerful and realistic like The Apple of Eden, the other sentimentally romantic like The City of Beautiful Nonsense, which was a considerable bestseller. He was extremely anxious to succeed on the stage and wrote a number of plays that had little success. He also wrote scenarios for films. This is what Waugh remembered in 1967, or was published in 1967. Temple Thurston was tall, dark, lean, photogenic. He was extremely athletic and played lawn tennis well enough to compete in the opening rounds at Wimbledon. He also played cricket at Lord's for the authors against the publishers, referring to J.M. Barrie's cricketing team. Temple Thurston frequently set his novels and plays in his wife's native Ireland. Among these are The Apple of Eden, Traffic, The City of Beautiful Nonsense, 13, The Passionate Crime, Enchantment, and The Tinker of Ballantrae. Ireland was to feature so strongly in his work that a review in the Irish Book Lover stated, "When Mr. Thurston left Cork for good, he carried away with him much of the legend and folklore, which he has since embodied in his novels." Although Temple Thurston enjoyed reasonable success, he was never convinced that his writing achieved the attention it deserved, nor was he happy with his own social standing. He was a great egoist, utterly self-centered, never satisfied that his work was receiving the attention it deserved from publishers and critics. He had a chip on his shoulder. He was never quite strong enough, quite good enough to stand alone. He was never given more than respectful attention in the weekly reviews. He was never included in general articles on trends in the modern novel. Even though he was not a major novelist, he had many of the minor qualities of a major novelist. He was ambitious and hardworking. He wrote with feeling. He was a better writer than many of those who were reviewed at length in highbrow columns. He himself was perpetually plagued by this lack of recognition. He was so desperately anxious to write, quote, a book that mattered. His lack of recognition and feelings of inadequacy would create tensions in the Thurstons' married life, which were compounded by his wife's literary and financial success. Although it was documented that Temple Thurston encouraged his wife to begin writing, as she became progressively successful, he became very jealous. Arthur Waugh stated that Temple Thurston was so jealous of the success of his wife's book, John Chilcote MP, that he persuaded Waugh to issue one of his novels in minute editions of 250 copies, so that he could claim to have sold more editions than she had. As income from her first 2 novels began to flow in, Thurston was able to buy a holiday home in her beloved Ireland. In 1904, she bought the house known as Maycroft in Ardmore, Waterford County, and I believe it is now a senior citizen home. As her material wealth increased, Thurston attempted to buy a much larger house in the same area, and although this was unsuccessful, this confirms her affinity with the area. Ireland, and in particular the Cork area, would play an important role in the writing which Thurston undertook following her marriage. While Thurston had made her home in London from the time of her marriage in 1901, she maintained a close affiliation with her homeland and would return to it each year for extended holidays. She clearly enjoyed her visits to Ireland, and much time and effort was spent in preparation of them. I could not find if Thurston raised the ideas of Irish home rule and returning Irish property to the Irish to the British elite, but I'm sure she did. Thurston was fastidious in the way she organized her household, and this merely increased as her material wealth grew. Letters would be sent ahead instructing her caretaker, Mrs. Mockler, of her duties before Thurston would arrive with her entourage. In many ways, she was typical of the majority of women who chose writing as a career during this period. The prerequisites for a writing career at this time were met. She came from a wealthy, middle-class background and was able to enjoy the luxuries of education, time, and space in which to pursue her writing, and she had social contacts, which ensured that she could find a suitable publisher for her work. One also has to remember that the populations of Ireland and England and the United States were millions less than they are now. And so it was a lot easier for a storyteller's voice to come through then as it is now. Although Thurston spent much time organizing her household staff, travel arrangement, and accounts, the real work of running her main home and 2 holiday homes was left to her secretary, caretakers, and servants. Although well known in the Cork area due to her family connections and her father's role as mayor, as her fame as a novelist grew, so too did the public interest in her as a celebrity. Mr. James Quain, a local Cork historian, gathered evidence of the time Thurston spent in Ireland and gave some indication of her flamboyant style and dress sense. From her summer home in Ardmore, Thurston would make regular trips to her hometown of Cork, where she usually stayed in Moore's Hotel and visited her friends and relatives. She was a woman with an imaginative and artistic sense of dress and frequently attracted attention when shopping, owing to her gracious presence and her fame as a novelist. To be seen as so obviously feminine was to be thought of as frivolous and empty-headed. The sneering at attention to and love of clothes and makeup, which became fashionable in feminist circles during the 19th century, was emphatically disapproved of. But Thurston embraced her femininity and did not shy away from it as Gertrude Stein and others would do. Looking at how Thurston socialized, she socialized a great deal and many knew her. The Sesame Club was open to both men and women and provided an environment in which they could socialize with like-minded people for the purposes of entertainment and social connections, which enabled them to further their careers and social standing. The Sesame Club was especially concerned with educational matters. It was seen as distinctly liberal, with perhaps a touch of radicalism. Men and women who composed both the offices and committees worked together amicably and harmoniously. Thurston's membership of such a liberal club indicates her independent mind and spirit, unusual perhaps for a woman of her time, but in accordance with the behavior and attitude of the new woman. Among the other clubs frequented by Thurston were the Ramblers Club, the Lyceum Club, the New Vagabond Club, and the Ladies' Athenaeum Club in Dover Street, London, which existed for the association of ladies who are connected with or interested in art, literature, music, or politics. The club system thrived in 19th and early 20th century middle and upper class society due to the limited social opportunities available. Membership of a club enabled women a degree of association with other like-minded men and women. Unfortunately, the club system has declined, but one could see how valuable it is to populations of people that are busy working and may not be able to interact regularly. Thurston used her experience of the club system and situated many of the characters of her novels in this setting. Drawing on the people and situations which were familiar to her enabled Thurston to create believable characters that truly captured the mood of the opening decade of the 20th century. By 1905, Temple Thurston began to represent his wife's literary work. His representation of Thurston's writing may have been a further attempt on her part at including him in her work, or perhaps he himself needed to be involved in her success in a controlling and dominant role. He was well known at his own publisher as being a difficult author. He was not easy to do business with. He published for 10 years with Chapman and Hall, but he was never satisfied with his book sales. He made considerable demands. One of Thurston's agents said, "I know that authors ask me out to lunch because they want to talk about their work, but I wish Temple Thurston would wait till I have finished my first cocktail before he starts telling me the plot of his new novel." Temple Thurston's pompous and arrogant manner did little to help his wife's career or endear him to those who managed and published her writing. He would often infuriate them by the tone of his letters. Although he frequently sent letters to Thurston's publishers and advisors, this, from 1905, is the first indication that he had taken over the management of his wife's work. I note that you have now decided to manage both your own work and Mrs. Thurston's. May I, however, take this opportunity of saying that if later you may find, as will probably be the case, that your own literary work takes up so much of your time as to make it difficult or even impossible for you to attend to the business connected with the disposal of it and Mrs. Thurston's novels, I shall be very glad again to place my services at your disposal. This note from the literary agency shows that they were not convinced of his ability or that he had a head for business. Temple Thurston's difficult nature has already been documented. However, his personality suffered in other ways. As a person, he was very far from being a happy man. It is possible that he was not a very pleasant one, revealing how unhappy the marriage probably was. There are no letters that have been found between Thurston and her husband, making it difficult to ascertain the state of their relationship. However, evidence of Temple Thurston's general attitude to women can be found in this extract of a letter to his literary agent from August 1907. Before the next 3 months have gone, I am looking forward to sending you a large portion of Mary Hamilton. It is not to form one of a trilogy after all, as the spinster does not, in my mind, represent a type of woman, merely a condition. There are, after all, only 2 types, mothers and the rest. From this, it appears that Temple Thurston may have only viewed his wife as one who avoids the responsibility of maternity in order to gain the pleasures of her sex. Whether their inability to produce children was a cause of friction or planning is unclear, but these comments show that he had little respect for unmarried or childless women. The Thurstons separated in 1907 and were divorced in 1910 on grounds of his adultery and desertion. The suit went undefended.
Thurston complained that she was making more money by her books than he was, that her personality dominated his, and had said that he wanted to leave her. As such, her divorce was the object of public interest, featuring in a wide variety of daily newspapers and periodicals. Thurston was a celebrity author who often existed in the realms of notoriety. Her divorce from novelist Temple Thurston was reported in great detail, and the case was in effect fought by him as one between the claims of decadent art and those of the new woman, attributing the desertion and adultery of which she accused him to their conflicting careers as novelists. Thurston was deeply affected by the divorce proceeding. At the time of her divorce, she wrote to Alfred Bulkeley Gavin, the man she hoped to marry the following year. It has been a bigger ordeal than I have ever known, and the relief is in proportion. I am very happy, very, very happy, and deeply grateful to the all-wise and supreme designer of our destiny for this gift of freedom. When the New York Times reported on the divorce, it reported that the pair were novelists, and it was a novelist pair divorcing, which impacted Thurston. An entertaining public speaker with a soft, gentle voice, she was a popular London socialite and was on her feet in no time. Tall and willowy in appearance, she supposedly suffered periodically from epilepsy and fainting fits, which we hear about in 1907 in the letter her secretary wrote for charity. The Irish writer Katherine Cecil Thurston was found dead in her Cork hotel room in 1911. The official inquiry in September 1911 gave the cause of death as asphyxia as a result of a seizure. She had been due to remarry later that month. She had already changed her will in favor of Bulkeley Gavin. Italian artwork, such as masterpieces by Palma Vecchio, appears to have entered his belongings around this time. So what happened to Katherine Thurston? Her body was discovered in Moore's Hotel, Cork, 1 month before she was due to marry Gavin. It was well known she frequented Moore's Hotel when she was in Ireland. She was 36 years old. Press speculation was rife as to the manner of her death. Despite the coroner's verdict of natural causes, her legions of fans were not convinced. This speculation was fueled and became literary biography when it was repeated by the bibliographer Stephen Brown in his catalogue of Ireland and Fiction in 1911. Personal correspondence from her friends revealed, I have just come across a letter I wrote to the editor of Virago Modern Classics. Mrs. Thurston suffered from epileptic fits brought on by the strain of her writing. She died after a particularly happy day spent with friends in Cork. I feel if Janet Madden Simpson, who must have been related to Catherine, being the Madden being her father's last name, knew the full details of Mrs. Thurston's death, she would realize that she died of an epileptic attack and that she certainly did not kill herself. The personal letters from Thurston to her lover Gavin, written in the months before her death, do not give the impression of a woman suffering depression who would kill herself. Apart from minor financial worries and the strain of an annulment, she was looking forward to her upcoming marriage and future literary plans. Her final letter to Gavin, written the day before her death, clearly expresses her optimism for the future. On no account take the dress boxes that are lying against the study wall, because these are the things I shall want to take away with me when we go on our short, sweet honeymoon. Paris, is it to be? Also in one of these boxes is my wedding dress. In her will, Thurston passed control of her estate to her friend Nancy's husband, William Hope Pollock, and her fiancé. Pollock, a stockbroker, and Gavin, a doctor, had very little interest or understanding of the literary market. It is possible to see from the many unpublished manuscripts within the archive that neither had an interest in managing her work or preserving her literary reputation. This is a direct contrast to her first husband, who managed her affairs at Blackwood's and Chapman and Hall. He was very involved with her books, even suggesting prices for many on the market. Although her literary career only spanned a 10-year period from the time of her marriage in 1901 until her death in 1911, Her novels and serializations were tremendously popular in Britain, Europe, and across the United States. The work produced by Thurston centered on the new woman, a modernist view, and were often sensationalist in nature. Many of her novels were set in Ireland and contained Irish characters and expressed sympathy for Irish themes. The countryside of Ireland, which is portrayed in Thurston's work, is romantic. Although brought up surrounded by exponents of the Irish Home Rule cause, Thurston avoided national politics explicitly, but gave them an implicit bias for her many readers. Now we look into this Gavin, her fiancé. Who was he? Although he was a doctor, why did he want to be listed in her will as her beneficiary? We see him appear again in 1929 when the English actress Lily Langtry left £1,000 to him in her will, and he was listed as living at 5 Berkeley Square, London, and described as a physician and a surgeon who treated wealthy patients. That's interesting. Why would he be a recipient of Lily Langtry, who was known to be a benefactress to younger, attractive men? In 1917, Gavin's brother died in World War I, and in 1944 he married Charlotte Tilke Madam, and by 1955 the trustees to this estate were fighting in Scotland Court of Session in May 1971. In February 1971, the capital of the fund amounted to about £365,000, which runs into the millions of pounds today. The circumstances of Thurston's death remain intriguing. The new man in Thurston's life, his medical knowledge and ability to maybe simulate asphyxia, the parallel, if the death was suicide, with her own book, The Fly on the Wheel, all suggest something more sensational, more like her own plots than death from an already diagnosed medical condition of epilepsy. When it came to the point, it seems Gavin was unwilling to go through with the marriage. He had not chosen a place for the honeymoon, yet already was in Thurston's will. Potentially suspicious circumstances abound here too, like the disappearance of documents, including the letters Gavin wrote the night before she died, and the refusal of any local office to investigate. Why would any local office refuse to investigate the death of this beloved Irish woman? Could it be because Thurston's advocacy for Ireland had put her at odds with many of the British elite, who would have to give up their Irish property to Irish citizens at a considerable default to them? Lily Langtry was actually one who had to relinquish her Irish properties to Irish citizens. The death of Thurston is the only result of two, generated by searching the entries in Orlando, women's writing in the British Isles from the beginnings to the present, for murder as the cause of death. So still it is believed that she was murdered. We also have to turn to her first husband, Ernest Temple Thurston, as a possible suspect. For many years, Temple Thurston found it difficult to make a living from writing, and worked as a yeast merchant, brewer, research chemist, and commercial traveler before finally becoming a reporter. His parents had brewing knowledge, and so it's possible that he used some of his chemistry skills during his marriage to Thurston and maybe at her death. His first novel, The Apple of Eden, was issued in a rewritten form in 1905, but it was not until the success of The City of Beautiful Nonsense that he found some kind of stability. When we look at his work, for example, Traffic, which was published 5 years after his marriage to Katherine Thurston, it shows a brutal tale of conflicting love, where the central character, Nano, is the offspring of a rural Irish woman and an unnamed English artist. She survives an unhappy marriage and prostitution in London to be rescued by an English bachelor. Was Thurston trying to convey something about his wife? In November 1924, Temple Thurston's second marriage ended. Joan Catherine, whom he had married a year after his divorce, told the divorce court that they had lived happily together until 1922. Now, who was this Joan Katherine? In 1907, Thurston had published a novel called Katherine, but dedicated it to his first wife. The book is about the insecurity and anger of a man, John, towards a woman, Katherine, who will not marry him. In 1922, Joan Katherine found her husband had engaged a private secretary, Emily Cowlin. Objecting to the fact that the two of them were on friendly terms, the second Mrs. Thurston left for a holiday in India, hoping it would give her husband time to get over it. While there, she received news that Emily Cowlin was expecting a baby. The following summer, Temple Thurston married Emily Cowlin at Kensington Register Office. It had been kept secret and only 6 people attended. After, the couple slipped away in a car before crowds had time to gather. In 1929, a play he had adapted from his book, Portrait of a Spy, was banned by the Lord Chamberlain. Based on the World War I exploits of Dutch spy Mata Hari, the play had been set to open at the London Coliseum until the ban was announced a couple of weeks before. Since the book itself had attracted little controversy, Temple Thurston suspected that the British establishment had some late thoughts about offending the French who had executed the spy. Thurston wrote a total of 40 books, from which 17 movies were made. In addition, he authored several theatrical plays, 3 of which were performed on Broadway and 4 of which were made into movies. His best-known work for the stage is The Wandering Jew, a play based and written in 4 parts, which was performed on Broadway in 1921. The play was adapted for a silent film of the same name in 1923, and a sound remake was released in 1933. His third wife published the play as a novel in 1934. At the end of February 1933, he was taken ill after a game of golf. He was diagnosed with lumbago and influenza, symptoms further complicated by pneumonia, and he died at his home in Maida Vale in March 1933. His wife Emily died in 1984. A street in Southall, West London, is named after him. I like to think it was also named after his first wife. If you have read anything by the Thurstons, please comment below. I would be very curious as to whether you found their work to be enduring, or if you have any theories on what Katherine Cecil Thurston actually died of.